remember the cold of that morning more than the faces. The kind of chill that seeps through your black dress and settles in your bones. I was standing by my husband's coffin, the sound of church bells echoing in the distance, but the only thing I could really hear were the whispers. They weren't whispers of sympathy. They weren't prayers. They were questions. Speculation. People leaning in close to one another, saying just loud enough for me to catch pieces of it. What will she do now? I heard he left more than just this house. Emily's probably going to handle everything anyway. I stood there, numb, clutching the folded flag they handed me like it could keep me upright. My husband, Daniel, was gone. And while I was drowning in grief, the people around me were already circling, already measuring what might be theirs. What no one knew, not even my daughter, was that Daniel had left me something no one could touch, something hidden, something I swore to myself I would never reveal. For days after the funeral, I walked through the house like a ghost, replaying the last moments I had with him, the words he whispered when he thought I wasn't really listening. You'll be all right. I made sure of it. I didn't understand at the time what he meant. Not fully. But I do now. Because 1 week later, just 7 days after I buried the man I had spent most of my life with, my daughter came into my living room without knocking. Her arms folded, her tone flat, almost rehearsed. And she said 6 words that told me exactly what I meant to her. Begin packing. The house has been sold. I looked at her. This child I raised, this daughter I once held against my chest when she had nightmares. And I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just smiled. A small, quiet smile that confused her. Because what she didn't know was that I had already packed. But they weren't my boxes. If this is your first time coming across one of our stories, welcome. Please hit the like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't scroll away, because what happened next no one saw coming. And if you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. I was only 19 when I married Daniel. 19, full of hope, and so certain that love was all we needed to build a future. He was older, steadier, already a man with plans while I was still learning who I was. I thought that was a good thing back then. I thought a man who had answers would keep me safe, would know where he was leading us. I told myself that his confidence was strength, that my role was simply to follow and support. And so I did. Our life began in a tiny rented apartment, the kind where you could hear the neighbors arguing through the walls, but I didn't care. I cooked cheap meals and sewed curtains from old bedsheets. And when Daniel came home, I welcomed him like I was the luckiest girl alive. He was ambitious, always reaching for more, and I admired that. He wanted better, and I wanted to give him the freedom to chase it. In those early years, I worked jobs that nobody ever noticed. Waitressing, cleaning, doing bookkeeping late into the night. Daniel was studying, networking, climbing, and I made sure he never had to worry about whether the bills were paid or if the fridge was stocked. I told myself that was love. Making sacrifices so the person you chose could shine. But over time, I began to realize that while he was shining, I was fading into the background. People praised his success, his sharp suits, his business sense. Nobody saw the woman behind him ironing those suits at midnight, the woman who stayed up with colicky babies while he prepared for a meeting. Daniel wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind. He was just absent. His mind was always somewhere else, on the next deal, the next investment, the next chance to prove himself. And I told myself not to complain because everything he did was for us. We had 2 children. Emily came first, our golden girl. From the moment she was born, Daniel adored her. She had his smile, his stubbornness, and even as a child she could command a room. He spoiled her in ways I never had the courage to. If she wanted the expensive shoes, he found a way to get them. If she wanted to skip chores, he waved me off. He wanted her to have the kind of life he had dreamed of but never had. I let it happen. Then came Michael, quieter, softer, more like me. He never demanded attention, never fought for the spotlight. He was the child who brought me flowers from the yard and slipped notes under my bedroom door saying he loved me. But in a house where loudness and ambition were rewarded, his gentleness went unnoticed. Even Daniel treated him differently, always pushing him to be stronger, tougher, more like his sister. And no matter what Michael did, it never seemed enough. That imbalance seeped into our home like a slow leak. Emily grew up believing she was entitled to everything she reached for. while Michael learned to accept whatever was left over. I tried to be the bridge to hold both of them close, but it's hard when even your husband tilts the balance. I often felt like I was standing on the edges of my own family. I was there when meals needed to be made, when homework needed to be checked, when sickness swept through the house and someone had to stay awake all night. But in moments of celebration, moments that mattered, I was a shadow. Daniel made the speeches. Emily basked in the applause. Michael lingered in the corners. And me? I just kept everything from falling apart. Over the years, Daniel became more successful. His business deals flourished. He started traveling more. Conferences, networking trips, quick getaways that were for work. At first, I believed him completely. I ironed his shirts, packed his bags, kissed him goodbye, and waited at the door for his return. But the trips became more frequent, the explanations shorter, the phone calls rushed. Sometimes I would pick up the phone and hear nothing but a click before the line went dead. Other times, I'd walk into the room and he'd close his laptop too quickly, his voice tightening as he ended a call. When I asked questions, he would smile in that calm way of his, the way that made me feel foolish for even asking. "Don't worry about it," he'd say. "I've got it handled." And I would swallow my doubts, because he was the provider, the man who had built this life we were living. But deep down I noticed things. The way he guarded his briefcase like it was a vault. The way he never let me open certain drawers in his study. The way he would disappear into his office at home and shut the door, emerging hours later with a look I couldn't read. I wasn't naive. I knew there were secrets. But I told myself secrets were part of marriage, part of life. If he was hiding something, maybe it was to protect us. Maybe it was to protect me. Still, there were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I truly knew the man I married. Wondering if the sacrifices I made had turned me invisible not only to my children, but to him as well. And yet, every time I doubted, he would do something small that made me believe again. He'd bring me my favorite flowers without being asked. He'd hold my hand during church. He'd whisper, "You're the reason I can do all this." And I would tell myself it was enough. That being the silent foundation was a kind of power, too. I didn't know then how much he was really hiding. I didn't know that while Emily grew closer to him, I was being written out of conversations that should have included me. I didn't know that while Michael stayed loyal to me, Daniel was quietly shaping Emily to take over in ways that would leave me standing outside my own home one day. But there were signs even if I ignored them. The hushed phone calls. The unexplained withdrawals. The sudden trips where his voice on the phone sounded too cheerful, too forced. The way Emily always seemed to know more about his business than I did. Even as a teenager, I should have asked harder questions. I should have demanded answers. But instead I told myself a story, the same one I had believed since I was 19, that loyalty was my strength, that silence kept the peace, and that everything he did was for us. It wasn't until the day I stood at his funeral, listening to the whispers of inheritance and property and what happens next, that I realized silence doesn't keep the peace. Silence only gives space for others to take what they believe is theirs. And while I stood there, clutching that folded flag, numb with grief, I began to understand that the life I thought I had was only half of the truth. The other half was waiting, hidden in the shadows of bank accounts I didn't know existed, papers I had never seen, and choices that would turn my daughter against me in ways I could never have imagined. The day of the funeral is burned into my memory in ways I wish I could erase. I thought grief would numb me, make everything blurry, but instead it sharpened the edges of every moment until they cut me. I remember the way people stared as I walked into the church, their eyes following me not with compassion, but with a kind of calculation, as though I were an exhibit they were there to assess. I was the widow, yes, but I was also the woman standing between them, and whatever they thought Daniel had left behind. I sat in the front pew with my children on either side of me, though it didn't feel like a family. Emily sat stiffly, her chin tilted, her hand resting in her husband's, as though she were the one greeting mourners, as though she were already the head of the household. Michael sat quietly, his shoulders hunched, his hand brushing mine every now and then, like he was silently reminding me that I wasn't alone, even if the room made me feel like I was. From the corner of my eye, I could see Daniel's relatives, the cousins who only came around when there was something to take, the brothers who never returned his calls until there was money involved. They whispered during the service, eyes darting toward me, toward Emily, toward the casket. I didn't need to hear every word to understand their meaning. They were wondering how the pieces would be divided. They were already deciding where I fit, and from the looks they gave me, I could tell it wasn't anywhere near the center. When the pastor spoke of Daniel's accomplishments, his business ventures, his generosity, the pews nodded in agreement, but I found myself shrinking smaller. I had been beside him through every rise, every fall, every sleepless night of worry, but in that church you would think he had done it all alone. They celebrated his name, but I felt invisible, as though my decades of sacrifice had been erased. After the service, when people came to pay their respects, I expected embraces, words of comfort. Instead, I received questions wrapped in false sympathy. "You must be worried about the house, dear," one of Daniel's cousins said as she patted my hand. "But don't worry, Emily will know how to handle things." I nodded politely, though the words stung. Emily will know. As though I, his wife, his partner for nearly 4 decades, had no place in the decisions about the life we built. Emily, for her part, leaned into it. She stood tall, speaking to relatives with authority, telling them about the arrangements, the after-service gathering, even instructing me where to stand for photographs. At one point, she even corrected me in front of others when I misspoke about the burial plot. Her husband, David, nodded along, puffing up like he was already the man of the family. I wanted to speak, to remind her that she was my daughter and not my replacement, but the weight of grief pressed me silent. And yet, beneath all of that, beneath the sting of being treated like a guest at my own husband's farewell, there was something else. A memory, small but sharp, that I had tucked away. It had been months before Daniel's health took its final turn. We were sitting in the kitchen late one evening, the house dark except for the glow above the stove. His voice was quieter than usual, not commanding, not distant, but almost fragile. He had reached for my hand, something he hadn't done in years without prompting. "You'll be all right," he had whispered, staring down at the table instead of into my eyes. "I've made sure of it. I tucked something away for you, just in case." At the time, I thought it was nothing more than a comfort, a way of easing his guilt for all the times he had left me alone. I hadn't pressed him then. I didn't ask what he meant or where it was. But in that church, as my daughter arranged herself like the queen of the day, and as whispers of inheritance slithered through the pews, those words rang louder in my head than the pastor's sermon. I tucked them into my chest like armor, though I didn't dare let them show on my face. As we left the church for the graveside, the cold air hit me like a wall. I walked behind the casket, following it to its final resting place, but I felt like I was being led somewhere else entirely, into a life I hadn't chosen. A life that others were already planning for me without my consent. Emily spoke to the funeral director with confidence, arranging the details as though she were the one who had signed the papers, not me. She thanked guests, gave instructions, even told Michael where to stand. And the mourners listened to her, not me. At the graveside, as the casket was lowered, I gripped Michael's hand and he squeezed back. His eyes met mine, soft but strong, and for a moment I felt anchored. But Emily was already turning away, already whispering to her husband about the luncheon, already moving past the finality of death and into whatever came next. I stood there long after others had gone, staring at the mound of dirt, the flowers piled high. My life with Daniel was gone, sealed beneath the earth, and yet the world around me was still pulling at what remained. I knew then that my battle was only beginning. I walked back to the car slowly, feeling the stairs still burning into me, the unspoken judgments following my every step. I was no longer seen as the wife who had stood beside Daniel, but as the obstacle standing in the way of everyone else's gain. And in that moment, I realized how truly alone I was. But even as the weight of that loneliness pressed down on me, I clung to Daniel's whispered words. He had promised me something. He had tucked something away. And while they circled like vultures, already dividing what they believed was theirs, I carried a secret none of them could see. It was exactly 1 week after I buried my husband when the air in my own home shifted. Grief still clung to me like a second skin. I hadn't even put away the black dress from the funeral when Emily walked into my living room without knocking, her heels clicking against the hardwood like she was entering a boardroom, not her mother's house. She didn't sit, didn't ask if I had eaten, didn't ask how I was managing. She just stood there, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her husband lingering behind her like an enforcer. Her voice was steady, clipped, almost rehearsed, and the words she spoke cut through me with a sharpness I never expected from my own daughter. "You can't keep this place, Mom," she said like she was announcing the weather. "It's already sold. You'll move into assisted living. It's better for everyone." I sat there in silence, the words echoing in my ears. For a moment I thought I had misheard. My own child, the girl I had carried in my arms, the girl whose tears I had dried through countless nights of worry, now looked at me like I was nothing more than a liability. I searched her face for a trace of warmth, for any flicker of compassion, but all I saw was a cold determination, the kind that made me realize she had been preparing for this moment long before Daniel's body was laid in the ground. My heart clenched. This wasn't the daughter I had raised, or at least not the one I believed I had raised. She didn't speak like a grieving child. She spoke like a businesswoman closing a deal, as though my home, my memories, my very existence could be signed away with the stroke of a pen. Her husband, David, stepped forward slightly, placing a hand on her shoulder like they were in this together. He didn't look at me with pity or respect. His expression was smug, the quiet kind of arrogance that told me he already believed this house was theirs. In that moment, I felt something inside me splinter. This wasn't grief. This wasn't the ache of losing a partner. This was betrayal, raw and cutting. And it was coming not from strangers, not from Daniel's greedy relatives, but from my own flesh and blood. The whispers from the funeral echoed back to me. "Emily will know how to handle things." And suddenly it all made sense. She hadn't stepped into that role after her father's death. She had been groomed for it, shaped for it, prepared by Daniel himself. In the days that followed, the house no longer felt like mine. I would walk into a room and conversations would stop abruptly. Emily's voice on the phone would lower as soon as I entered, her eyes flicking toward me with that same practiced calm. I noticed papers missing from Daniel's office, folders that had once been stacked neatly in his desk suddenly gone. When I asked about them, Emily shrugged, claiming she was just organizing for me. But it wasn't just her. Daniel's brothers, his cousins, the in-laws who had once been polite at best, now spoke to me like I was incapable of making decisions. "You shouldn't be handling finances on your own," one of them said at the dinner table, his voice dripping with false concern. "It's too much for you. Emily and David can take care of that." They spoke as though I wasn't even in the room, their words carrying the weight of a judgment already decided. I watched as the daughter I had nurtured began to treat me like an obstacle standing in her way. Her tone was sharp, her patience thin, her decisions final. She no longer asked what I wanted. She informed me what had been arranged. Assisted living. Downsizing. Selling off. Every word was like a nail hammered into a coffin, not Daniel's but mine. Then came the night I walked past the study and heard Emily's voice, low and urgent. She didn't know I was standing in the hall. I froze listening, my heart pounding in my ears. "Dad wanted me to handle this," she said into the phone. "He trusted me with it before he got sick. Mom doesn't understand how any of it works, but we can't let her stall. The longer she stays in that house, the harder this gets." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. The words confirmed what I had feared but hadn't let myself believe. My husband had shared secrets with our daughter that he never shared with me. He had entrusted her with the pieces of our life that I should have known about, that I should have had a say in. The betrayal wasn't just Emily's, it was Daniel's too. He had chosen her. He had given her the power. And in doing so, he had left me standing in the ruins of a marriage I thought was built on trust. That night, as I sat alone in my bedroom, staring at the photographs of a life I thought I understood, I felt something harden inside me. The grief was still there, but now it was tangled with anger, with a deep wound that only betrayal can carve. They thought I was weak. They thought I would step aside quietly, that I would let them decide where I belonged. But they were wrong. I need you to breathe. I wasn't ready for that twist either. If your heart just dropped, tap the like button. It tells me I'm not the only one who felt it. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with someone who loves real-life drama as much as you do, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face, cold and calculating, and I heard her voice whispering on the phone about decisions already made without me. But fate has a way of revealing what is hidden in the darkest corners, and sometimes, The truth comes when you least expect it. It happened while I was cleaning Daniel's study. I hadn't touched much since he passed, but something inside me urged me to open the drawers he always kept locked. My fingers brushed against the underside of his desk, and there it was, a small brass key taped to the wood. My pulse quickened as I slid it into the bottom drawer, the one that had remained shut for years. It clicked open with a reluctant groan, and inside, neatly tucked away, was a manila envelope with my name written across it in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded the documents. The first was a deed, property ownership, a small but elegant house tucked away in a quiet part of town, purchased in my name. Not Emily's. Not Daniel's. Me. He had bought it years ago, long before the cancer, long before the whispers of betrayal had crept into our family. He had never mentioned it, never even hinted. A home, my home, hidden from everyone. A secret he had kept between himself and the ink of a contract. But that wasn't all. Buried beneath the deed was a bank statement. My eyes widened as I traced the numbers. $350,000. A private account, accessible only to me. No joint names. No co-signers. Just me. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I thought my knees would give way. After weeks of feeling powerless, discarded, treated like a burden, here it was. Proof that Daniel had, in his own way, thought of me. Proof that he had left me something untouched by Emily's reach, something she couldn't manipulate or sell out from under me. But the relief was tangled with anger. Why had he hidden this from me? Why keep a secret that could have spared me from the humiliation of listening to our daughter decide my future? Why let me feel so small, so stripped of dignity, when all along he had left me with security? Was this his way of protecting me? Or had he simply not trusted me to know? I sat in that study for hours, staring at the papers, torn between gratitude and fury. Should I confront Emily? Tell her everything, wave the deed in her face, and reclaim my voice at the table she had stolen from me? Or should I stay silent, guard the secret, and let her believe she had won, all while I quietly built my own escape? The memories came flooding back, memories I hadn't allowed myself to touch in years. I remembered working 2 jobs when Emily was little, stretching myself thin while Daniel traveled for business, often leaving me to shoulder the bills and the loneliness. I remembered pulling late shifts at the diner, then coming home to check Emily's homework by dim light, my body aching but my heart determined to give her a better life. I thought of the years we scraped together enough to send her to college. The sacrifices, the nights I went without new clothes, the vacations we never took, the small indulgences I denied myself, all so she could have her education. And when she graduated and said she wanted to focus on her career, it was me who stepped in, raising her children, my grandchildren, as if they were my own. I gave her freedom. I gave her space to chase her dreams. And now that same daughter stood in my home, stripping me of the very things I had bled to protect. The anger burned hotter with every memory, but beneath it was something sharper. Clarity. I saw her for what she was, not just ambitious, not just hardened by her father's influence, but entitled. She had grown used to taking, always assuming I would bend, that I would sacrifice. She had mistaken my silence for weakness. A few nights later, the family gathered for dinner. It was supposed to be a meal of comfort, a fragile attempt at togetherness after Daniel's passing. But even in grief, Emily couldn't hide her hunger for control. She raised her glass halfway through the meal, her smile polished, her voice smooth. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she began, glancing around the table like she was the head of the family now. "Dad would have wanted us united. And in that spirit, I've already started the process of selling the house. The realtor thinks it will move quickly. It's a prime location, and with the market right now." Her words trailed into numbers and logistics, as though I wasn't sitting at the head of the table, as though my memories, my sweat, my very life in those walls meant nothing. She didn't even look at me when she said it. To her, I had already been erased. I felt the eyes of Daniel's relatives slide toward me, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to protest or break down. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I smiled. A small, quiet smile that didn't reach my eyes. I picked up my glass, took a sip, and let the silence hang heavy around me. Inside, my heart was steady. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I had nowhere left to go. But they were wrong. I had a key they didn't know existed. I had a house they had never seen. I had money they couldn't touch. And most of all, I had patience. The kind of patience born from years of sacrifice. The kind of patience that knows silent revenge cuts deeper than loud wars. That night, I didn't sleep out of grief. I didn't toss and turn with despair. For the first time in weeks, I rested. Because I knew something they didn't. And in that knowledge, I had found my power again. I moved in silence, carrying my resolve like a secret flame no one could see. By day, I allowed Emily to believe she was orchestrating everything. Papers shuffled across the table, realtors calling, her voice rising in self-importance as she made decisions on behalf of everyone. By night, I began to gather my things. Not the heavy furniture or the obvious items she would notice, but the things that mattered. Daniel's letters, the photographs I wanted to keep, the jewelry tucked in old boxes, and a few of my clothes. Each trip, I carried something small and slipped it into the trunk of my car. Each trip, I drove to the quiet little house my husband had tucked away for me and set those things gently inside. With every piece I moved, my heart grew lighter, and the old house, Emily's target, felt less and less like mine. The second home was smaller than where I had lived most of my life, but the air there was different. It carried no arguments, no judgment, no voices raised in entitlement. It was mine, untouched, untainted by Emily's control. When I unlocked that door for the first time, it felt like stepping into a sanctuary Daniel had built for me in silence, a place where I could reclaim my peace. But peace was not my only goal. I needed to protect myself, and for that I needed knowledge. I made an appointment with a lawyer, quietly, discreetly. I gathered the papers Daniel had left, the will, the account details, the deed to the house, and placed them in a leather folder. Sitting across from the lawyer, I laid everything out. His brow furrowed as he reviewed the documents, and then his lips curled into something close to surprise. "Mrs. Hart," he said, tapping the papers, "your husband left you in a stronger position than you realize. The deed is ironclad. This property cannot be contested. And this account solely in your name, no one else has access. As for the family home, let her try to sell it. She has no legal authority to finalize a sale without your consent. If she does, she commits fraud." The weight of his words sank into me like steel beneath my skin. For weeks I had been treated like a guest in my own life, as though I were powerless, as though my voice no longer mattered. Now I saw the truth. Emily's power was an illusion, propped up by assumption and arrogance. That night, when I returned to the little house, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the bank documents again. $350,000. Enough to secure a future. Enough to build a life not bound to Emily's decisions. But I didn't want it all for myself. Michael, my son, had been quiet through the storm, watching, hesitant to step between his sister and me. I knew the strain it put on him, being torn between loyalty to me and the pull of family unity. I called him to meet me, and when he arrived, I handed him the folder. He looked confused at first, then stunned as his eyes moved across the pages. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were glassy. "Mom," he whispered, voice thick. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to be sure," I said softly. "And because I wasn't ready to let anyone else carry the weight of it. I wanted you to know when I had a plan." He reached across the table, covering my hands with his. "You've been carrying everyone for years. You paid for Emily's schooling, raised her kids, worked yourself to the bone for this family. And she repays you by trying to strip you bare? No. Not this time. Mom, you're not alone in this. Let them think they've won. We'll let them believe it until the last moment, and then," he smiled faintly, almost mischievously, "then we'll show them who really holds the cards." Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them back. It wasn't grief this time, it was relief. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I didn't feel like I was walking through this fire alone. My son was with me, and together we would navigate the storm. So I began to set money aside. Not all of it, but enough to secure Michael's future, to give him something he could lean on when the weight of responsibility became too heavy. The rest I kept, carefully tucked away for the life I was quietly building. Meanwhile, Emily marched ahead with her plans, her voice sharp as she discussed offers from buyers, her tone dismissive whenever she spoke to me. She paraded her authority, bragging about how soon the deal would be finalized, how this sale would bring in a fresh start for all of us. I never corrected her. I never reminded her that without my signature, no papers could be signed, no deal could be closed. Instead, I let her build her tower higher and higher, brick by brick, blind to the fact that its foundation was sand. Every family dinner became a stage for her announcements. She spoke of potential buyers as though she already owned the keys, discussed renovations as though the house were hers alone. And each time I simply smiled. A small, knowing smile that she mistook for resignation. In silence, I let her believe she had stripped me of everything. In silence, I let her prepare her victory speech. And in silence, I prepared the stage for her downfall, because revenge doesn't always come in fire or fury. Sometimes, the most devastating revenge is silence, letting someone taste the sweetness of triumph, only to watch it turn bitter in their mouth when they realize they've been playing a game they never understood. And I was ready. I remember the morning they came for me, boxes in hand, voices sharp with false authority, as though I were some fragile relic being carted off to storage. Emily led the charge, her husband beside her, smirking like he'd already won. She looked me square in the eye and said with a tone dripping in satisfaction, "It's time, Mom. Begin packing." I didn't flinch. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. Instead, I smiled a soft knowing smile, and simply replied, "Already done." Confusion flickered across her face, brief but undeniable. She moved quickly through the rooms, searching, expecting to find the clutter of my life still spread across drawers and shelves. But room after room, she found only emptiness. Closets bare. Cabinets cleared. Every picture, every memory, every possession gone. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she grew more frantic, her husband trailing behind, whispering questions she couldn't answer. Where had it all gone? How had I packed so swiftly? I stood in the entryway, watching her panic build like a tide she couldn't stop. The house no longer felt like mine. Not because of her schemes, but because I had already released it from my heart. My belongings were safe elsewhere. My life, my future, already waiting for me. Emily thought she had stripped me of control, but she had only proven how blind ambition makes fools of those who chase power without wisdom. Michael stood quietly by my side, his presence steady and reassuring. He had been the only one I let into the truth, the only one I trusted with the secret his father left me. He knew of the second home. He knew of the account, and he knew that while Emily staged her shallow triumph, I had been laying the foundation of my silent victory. He leaned toward me then, his voice calm, almost proud. "Mom, let them think they've won. That's the sweetest part." As we stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, freer. My car waited in the driveway, its trunk already loaded. Emily followed us out, her voice sharp now, demanding explanations, accusing me of deception, of betrayal. But I said nothing. Not a single word. I simply turned the key, started the engine, and drove away. My silence cut deeper than any argument ever could. But here's what Emily never saw coming. The house she so eagerly claimed to sell, the one she paraded as her prize, had never truly belonged to her. It wasn't hers to take. It wasn't hers to profit from. My husband had safeguarded me long before she ever sharpened her claws. That deed, that legal ownership, that control was always mine. She had schemed and plotted over air, celebrating a hollow victory. And now, as the truth would inevitably dawn, she would come to realize that all her manipulation had earned her nothing but emptiness. I drove not to some sterile assisted living facility, not to a borrowed corner of someone else's home, but to the house my husband had quietly placed in my name years ago. A home tucked away, warm and welcoming, where my life could begin anew. The walls held no echo of betrayal, no shadow of greed. It was mine alone. And as I carried my bags inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Emily had wanted me small. She had wanted me silent, powerless, dependent. Instead, she gave me the gift of clarity. Her betrayal revealed where my true strength had always been, in my ability to endure, to outlast, to choose silence when words would only waste themselves on the deaf ears of the selfish. That night, I sat in the living room of my new home, the quiet surrounding me like a gentle shield. Michael sat across from me, his smile soft, his eyes reflecting a mix of relief and admiration. We didn't need to speak much. The silence was enough. For the first time, I realized that silence itself can be the loudest kind of victory. Emily would learn in time that her schemes had backfired, That the mother she tried to push aside had not only survived but risen above her cruelty. And though she would never hear me boast or gloat, she would carry the weight of her own failure every time she remembered my smile as I walked away. Because that smile wasn't born of anger. It wasn't born of vengeance. It was born of freedom. Freedom from her control, from her entitlement, from the chains of a family that had forgotten what love was supposed to mean. And so, I live now not in the shadow of what they tried to take from me, but in the light of what my husband quietly secured for me long before I ever realized I would need it. I will never let them take this away. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It isn't even spoken. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply walking into the life they thought they could steal from you, and closing the door behind you. And that is why I smiled. If this story gripped you, stay with me. Because there are more stories where silence, secrets, and strength turn betrayal into power. Subscribe, and let's keep uncovering the hidden chapters together.